Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the first Children and Family Scrutiny Board of the 26-27 year. Nice to see everybody. Lots of new faces and so on. Just a reminder that the meeting is being broadcast live in case members of the public who can't get in today would like to see it, so please bear that in mind. As usual, we'll start with introductions. I'm Billy Flynn. I'm Councillor for Adler Wharfdale Ward, and I'm Chair of this Scrutiny Board. And we go round to the left. Councillor Scopes.
Hi, I'm Councillor Andrew Scopes, Councillor in Beeston Holbeck.
Good afternoon. My name's Isaac Wilson. I'm a councillor in Wheatwood, and I'm substituting today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Oliver Edwards, and I'm one of the Guysey and Rawdon Wards councillors.
Good afternoon, Craig Timmins. I'm a councillor in the Carverley and Farsley ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Helen Hayden, Executive Member for Children and Families.
Good afternoon, I'm Ben Finley. I'm Acting Deputy Director for Children's Services.
Hi, Rebecca McCormack, Chief Officer for Education in Children and Families.
Afternoon, Chris Hudson, Performance Programme Manager for Children and Families, here for item 9.
Afternoon, Kate Blacker, Co-opted Member.
Maria Adams, Leeds Parent Carer Forum.
Good afternoon, Tim Goodall, Councillor for Headingley and Hyde Park.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Rob Chesterfield for Middleton Park Ward.
Good afternoon, Jane Senior, Councillor for Morley South.
Good afternoon, Ryan Stevenson, Councillor for Harewood.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rob Clayton. I'm the Scrutiny Advisor to the Board.
Thank you all very much indeed. Just before we launch into the agenda, I'd just like to not exactly a vote of thanks, I think, but just to register our thanks for the people who on the board last year. There's been a considerable number of changes for fairly obvious reasons following the local elections, but I'd just like to place on record my thanks to the following. Councillor Rick Downs, Councillor Cavani, Councillor Jenkins, Wilson, who's here today, Lennox, Monarcha, Renshaw, Rontry, and Andrew Graham, who wasn't a councillor, of course, but was a member of the board for many years. And I think it would be timeless, I think, to also mention Mahalia France-Mayer, who passed away very sadly last year. And a very warm welcome to councillors who are on the board this time for the first time. Councillor Rob Chesterfield, Laura Jane Fisher, who isn't here today. Councillor Wilson is substituting for her, Councillor Jane Senior, and Councillor Craig Timmins. One or two of you brand new, of course, to the council as well as everything else. So anyway, a very, very warm welcome to you all. And on we go onto the agenda. Rob, would you like to take us through the first number of items?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The standard procedural items that we cover at each meeting. I'll just run through those, Chair. Item 1 is appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents, and there are no appeals against items on today's agenda. Item 2, items for exclusion of the press and public, and there are no such items that meet that criteria today. Item 3 is late items of business, and we have no late items today, Chair. Item 4 is declaration of interest, and I will briefly pause to allow any elected members to declare any under Leeds City Council's Code of Conduct. I shall take silence as none. Item 5 is apologies. As already mentioned by yourself, Chair, Councillor Fisher is unable to attend today with Councillor Wilson attending as a substitute. And we also have apologies from some of our co-opted members, Helen Bellamy, Nick Tones, Anas Kitu and Shanaz Gull. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Rob. I really should have mentioned at the start, we've changed the agenda slightly today to accommodate a situation which we won't go into at the moment, but the first 8 items are as on the agenda. Item 9 now will be the performance report. Item 10 will be the returning home to Leeds update, and item 11 will be the sources of work. So apologies for the late change, but there was a very good reason for it, which has become even worse today. But on to the minutes, item number 6, which is we start on page 7 of the pack. And I'll refer to the pages on the pack because it gets very confusing if I don't. Move to page 7. Any comments? Page 8. Any comments? Page 9. Any comments? Page 10. 11. 12. 13. 14. 15, 16 and 17. So no comments on it so far. Rob, any matters arising from this?
Just very briefly, Chair, relating to minute 99, which was our end of year statement, just to the recommendation approved publication of that, and that has now been published. So just to put that on the record, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody else, of course the people who were here last time, of course, have any further comment on it? No? Okay, thank you. If I could then have a proposer to say that these are to approve the correct record of the minutes from the meeting held on the 16th of March. Anyone like to propose it? Seconder, Ryan. All in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Unanimous. Thank you all very much indeed. Okay. Item 7, co-opted members. Rob, would you like to take this one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, each year, each scrutiny board considers an item on co-opted membership of the board for the forthcoming municipal year. That is a standard process for most of the council scrutiny boards. Within children and families, there are additional provisions for co-opted members and also some additional existing practice that has impacted on the board. So, unlike other boards in the main, the Children and Families Board does fill its 5 non-voting co-opted membership allowance. So 5 is the maximum that's allowed. And this year the membership remains the same as in last year. Not all of them are able to attend today. I've already read out that Helen Bellamy, Nick Tones and Shanna's Gull were unable to attend today, but there's also Kate and Maria who've agreed to sit on the board again. So that is one of the recommendations on the report for approval. There are additional requirements on the board for education representatives. Unusually this year, because we would usually have a Church of England diocese representative and a Roman Catholic one as part of our process. Unusually this year, Andrew Graham, who has stood on the board for a number of years, has stepped down, and I am awaiting a nomination from the Church of England diocese. That is in course, and I have corresponded with them, and that will be hopefully resolved for the next meeting. The Roman Catholic position is very long-standing member Tony Britton, who is obviously here today to attend, and then we do have provision for governor representatives, primary, secondary and silk representation. The primary position is filled, and that's a 4-yearly term, so it would be continued from last year, which is Mr. Anas Kitu, who's unfortunately unable to attend. The secondary position has been a vacancy for a while, and it is something I continue to work, and I have a refreshed list of emails to contact. With the smaller pool of maintained schools at secondary level. It is a much smaller number of governors to approach, but I am going to renew that process, and the same with silk provision to try to fill those vacancies this year, Chair. So I think that covers the position on co-opted members.
Thanks very much indeed, Rob. So on to the recommendations. The board is recommended to consider and approve the appointment of non-voting co-opted members of the Scrutiny Board for the 26-27 municipal year, and note the nomination for the Roman Catholic Diocese with the Children and Family Scrutiny Board in accordance with statutory requirements, and note that the Church of England Diocese nomination is to be confirmed. Could someone propose those recommendations are accepted? Seconded? Thank you all very much indeed. All in favour? Any against? Abstentions? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much again. And Rob, on to you again, I think, for the next item.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, another item that is taken at the first meeting of each municipal year, which is just establishing the board's terms of reference. So it's a similar report to previous years. Appendix 1, there are the rules of procedure applied to all scrutiny boards. Appendix 2 provides Article 6 from the Constitution, which relates to some of the special responsibilities and wider responsibilities that the various boards have. And Appendix 3 is the remits and the executive functions that sit within the remits that apply to each of the 7 scrutiny boards, including the Children and Families Board. I think there's nothing exceptional to report this, Chair, other than that position continuing, and then just seek approval from the board for those.
Items of the agenda, the performance report, which has been brought forward, as I mentioned before. Chris, over to you, I think. Could you ensure that you pull the microphone as close to you as possible, because some of us at the top end of the table are rather more ancient than the bottom end. And remember to switch it off when you're sort of finished. Okay. There'll be a number of questions, obviously, and comments, etc. I would prefer if members would wait till the end, but if it's a desperate question you want to ask, then by all means do so. Chris.
Thank you. So this is the first performance report for the 26-27 financial year, and it provides the board with an update on the Children and Young People's Plan and our ambitions for children and young people living and growing up in Leeds. It contains a mix of performance data and service delivery and improvement narrative about the work ongoing both within the Children and Families Directorate but also the Children's Partnership in Leeds. It does touch briefly on some of the significant national reforms that are underway at the moment, and that includes social care reforms, SEND reforms and some changes in public health area as well. Much of the information is presented at city level. We do that partly so we can place Leeds' performance alongside some of our comparators, but partly to keep the amount of information provided manageable in the appendices. There is some cluster level information in Appendix 1B, and that will show the differences that we do see across the city in some of our performance measures. I'm not intending to delve into any figures specifically, but I thought I'd very briefly just run through the appendices, just give a bit of context as to why they're there and what's in them. So Appendix 1, as I said, city and cluster level information about our performance measures in the Children and Young People's Plan. And some of these figures are referenced elsewhere in other parts of the report. Appendix 2 we've included for completeness. Most of the attainment information there was included in a January update to Scrutiny, but some of the information was still provisional at that point. That's all confirmed now, and so that's there, as I say, for completeness. Appendix 3 contains school attendance data for the last academic year, 24-25. That's the latest official national data, which is why we've included that. And at point 21 in the main report, you'll see some in-year attendance data that we've included as well. And that shows a slight improvement in primary and secondary attendance in the current year compared to the previous year. Appendix 4 provides detailed updates on our 3 obsessions in the Children and Young People's Plan. And I'd probably draw your attention there to the narrative around need and not known, where the report talks about a capital investment programme that will give more places at college, and the update under the health obsession, which includes some commentary on the implementation of some national programmes in Leeds. And then finally, Appendix 5 gives the latest position on education, health and care plans, and that also touches upon the SEND reforms, the national reforms, which is a multi-year initiative that aims to catch needs early and shift the focus towards better support within mainstream schools. And I think rather than delving into any data myself, I'll probably pass over to colleagues and then open for questions, if that's okay.
Thanks very much indeed, Chris. And indeed, you anticipate, I should have said at the start, please don't go into all of the statistics because we have read them, and I'm sure your colleagues will want to elaborate on them as well. Councillor Hayden, Ben or Rebecca, would you like to comment further?
Thank you, Chair. It's a very wide-ranging report, which it always is. So I'd like to thank everyone who pulls it together, pulls all this information together. There's lots of data. And for everyone who continues to work across Leeds to achieve the best outcome for children and families. We're seeing good progress in a number of key areas. We also have significant challenges, in particular in relation to SEND and education, health and care plans. But we've got positive movement in education outcomes with improvements at Key Stage 2, strong performance at Key Stage 4 and continued progress at Post-16. And it's really good to see that attendance is also improving across primary and secondary phases. I'd like to thank everyone who works really hard in this really tricky area. We continue to invest in early intervention and prevention, and there's lots of new interventions in terms of and projects, including our Best Start Family Hubs and the Family Hub networks, and this will be critical to improving the long-term outcomes for children and family. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to everyone across Leeds who this data relates to, all the work that you do. It's numbers, but it's actually people and children and an awful lot of hard work that goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Ben or Rebecca, would you like to comment?
No, thank you, Chair. I think we'll respond to questions as they come, but I don't think there's anything further to add to Chris and Councillor Hayden's comments.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Chris, you did talk about education, health and care plans. I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more in terms of clearance rates for the first assessment of plans. There isn't an awful lot that I could see anyway in the annual reviews, which I think is there's also an issue around Sunday delays, etc. Perhaps you could expand on that a little, or one of your colleagues.
Yeah, I'll start by going through some of the figures in Appendix 5 and then possibly invite colleagues to come in as well. So what we have seen, certainly over the last few years, but particularly last year, the demand for education, health and care plans continued to rise. And we did see some rapid growth between 2024 and 2025. And you can see from some of the tables that are included there, significant rise, particularly the second table, which shows for the last 2 years about a 50% increase in the number of assessments coming in. So obviously a huge increase in the number of assessments that are coming in, and therefore plans that are being produced at the further end. So we have seen over 3,500 assessments last year, and I think the latest figures in year will show a continued increase. So what we are seeing is large demand and the pressure there to assess those cases and move through to plans being issued. So the number of plans continues to increase each year. In the report, it was nearly 7,850. I believe the number is now just over 8,100. So again, that continues to increase. What I would say, just thinking about the national context at the moment, if you consider the number of plans but express it as a rate per 10,000, Leeds is still not level with some of our comparators. So we might expect, if we were to be in line with comparators, that number would go up as assessments continue to work through the process and are seen and become plans. I suppose the excuse me, one of the areas of focus obviously does remain on that the plans issued within the 20-week statutory timescale, and to the end of March, 7.5% of those plans have been issued within timescale. That figure has gone up in the last couple of months. I don't have that figure to hand, but we have seen a further increase in that. Obviously, that's a number that we would like to see further increase, but we have seen some short-term improvements in that timeliness, and hopefully that continues.
Rebecca, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. I think, as we've acknowledged previously here at Children and Family Scrutiny, we recognise that there's a challenge around the timeliness of our education, health and care plans and having those issued. There's been a lot of work looking at our targeted operating model. How is it that the team needs to be structured to make sure we can meet the demand in terms of assessing children's needs and then issuing those education, health and care plans. And then at the same time, the SEND reforms have been published, and we've got a requirement to have our SEND reform plan submitted to the DFE by the 19th of June. So there's a whole range of work that we have been doing that we're then reflecting on to look at how that aligns with the SEND reforms and what the future needs to look like. We have looked at recruiting additional staff into the SEND SAP team, and at the same time understand from schools and from families that the importance is in the quality of the plans, and actually not just meeting the timeliness deadline, but making sure that the plan that's written is fit for purpose and offers the support to the schools and to the families to understand how those needs can be met. That it's not just about us hitting the timeliness deadline, whilst that's a really clear performance indicator, it's not necessarily the thing that will offer the children and young people the best support that they need. So it is about us making sure the plans, when they're written, are quality and are reviewed regularly and provide that support and the information that the schools need to make them really useful for children and young people. So we absolutely recognise that the timeliness is an important measure, but it's not the only thing, and it's not the most important thing for us. That's about making sure we're identifying children's needs and meeting them.
Thank you. I know obviously there's going to be an inspection report in the fairly near future, I would imagine, so it's going to come back, I would think. Councillor Scopes would like to, I think, ask a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I guess I'd start by saying that the 7.4% is a real problem. It's not like we need a little bit of improvement. This should be 100%. 100% of people should get their plans within the 20-week statutory deadline. So, in my opinion, looking for small little improvements isn't good enough. And I guess behind each of that 92.6% is a family and children who are struggling and families that are struggling. And so, when I go to Centastic, which is a support group in my ward in Beeston, Holbeck, depending on where you class it, there's parents every time I go there that are really struggling and are really upset about this. And I guess what I would say also is this isn't a new problem. It's been an issue for a long time. And so it feels like there's a real challenge to be saying, you're coming to here today and you recognise you've said before and recognise this is a problem before. And it feels like that the numbers look like we're moving backwards. So there's more in the pipeline now than there were at the beginning of January, which means we're producing less EHCPs and we're getting requests. And I guess on top of that, when we got rid of FFI, so for people who don't know, FFI was Funding First Initiative, which was got rid of by Leeds maybe 2 years ago. We were given assurances then that so in the past, when people came to me and say, my EHCP is taking too long, I said, well, I know it's taking too long, but your school's getting funding anyway through FFI, and so your child isn't losing out. And when we got rid of that, and I know we kept it for the children already in FFI, but for children coming up through the case, it's much harder to make that argument. And at that time, we were given assurances that the EHCP backlog would be dealt with and you'd get on top of it. And I guess that was 2 years ago, and there may be a 12-month plan, I think, to get on top of it entirely. And so there's just, for me, there's just a little bit of lack of credibility in the plan and where we are now. I think that's my challenge to you, is the plan to get on top of this credible? And if not, what else do we need to be doing? And how can we as a scrutiny board support that action plan to make this really high priority, because it is a high priority for every parent of a child with EHCP who needs an EHCP. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scopes.
Yeah, I fully accept that and it's of deep frustration and not acceptable. The small amount of 20-week that don't meet the 20-week timeliness. So 2 years ago, when we were addressing this and putting more resource in, we wanted to tackle the oldest the first, or the people who have been waiting the longest the first. Once a plan's out of the 20-week deadline, there's no other criteria. So it is, it's if it's 21 weeks, it's still, when it's completed, it's still out of the 20-week deadline. I'm not making any excuses here, but we made the decision to tackle the oldest the first, because the children and families deserve that. That resulted in more and more backlog because the demand increased with our having to. It was a requirement that we phased out FFI, funding for inclusion. So it did mean that more and more plans were not done. We've taken the decision this year to change that, and that's what I think you should always do. If something's not working, you change it. And now we've brought in more provision for a twin track approach, so that new plans coming in will be tackled by one team, and therefore hopefully, because that's what I'd be aiming for, 100% done in the 20-week time thing, and then another team continuing to continue to tackle the backlog. But those plans will never be within 20 weeks now that they've gone beyond that. So, and as Rebecca said, we're very, very keen to make sure that our plans are high quality, and we are in discussions with schools to look at packages of support while they wait for EHCPs, because one of the problems with EHCPs, which funding for inclusion addressed, was that the money only comes to the school for support when the plan is written, whereas funding for inclusion, as soon as a school requested SEND money for SEND support, then we were able to transport that from the high needs block. Rebecca, do you want to come in? Yeah.
Thank you. I guess the other thing to add is that we have recently reset the Send and AP, what was previously the Send and AP Partnership Board and is now a Send and AP Improvement Board with an independent chair. So we've reformed that governance arrangement. So just in terms of thinking through the credibility of those plans, I think they were credible at the time they were written, and they had the right intention at the time, and circumstances such as increased demand. So the plan for dealing with the backlog at the time was fit for purpose, I believe. And then there was such increased demand through the implications from the SEND reforms as noise came out about those nationally. Every local authority that we're in contact with explained that they'd seen an increase in requests for EHCP statutory needs assessments as well, because of that fear that families had that EHCPs were going to be no longer a thing. And so the demand for EHCPs went up. That was outside of control. But in terms of credibility and looking at those plans, because of the reform plan that we're required to submit to the DFE, and as it was being mentioned, the recent SEND Ofsted inspection, that SEND and AP Improvement Board will have that oversight through that independent chair and the partners, because it's about the partnership rather than just the local authority, to drive forward the improvements and making sure we're getting the traction in the direction of travel that we need to go.
Councillor Scopes.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think what would be really helpful is to have some data on the average time it's taken to do a case. So if what you're saying is correct, you'd expect that number average time to be going down, and that would be helpful to validate what you're saying. And I guess it's impossible for us to objectively say exactly how effective this is going to be, but it looks like hopefully this is coming back in, like performance is coming back in January 2027. I guess we'll be looking at this quite closely then as well, I'm sure, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe coming back a bit before then, I think, once the SEND inspection report is in. I didn't catch it, I don't think, but did somebody mention, or does anybody say anything about the annual review delays? I know that had gone up quite considerably from around 7% to about 18%, but still considerably short of where it should be. Has there been any improvement in that?
I don't think we've got that data to hand. I know it's not in the report. Again, that's something we could look at along with the average time that's been taken. I'm not sure. I was just quickly glancing at the work schedule to see. I know that previously we've had the SEND and EHCP reports coming here. I don't know whether that's scheduled in to come. I can see it in February next year, but I don't know whether we want to have a separate paper that looks at those average wait times and that information about annual reviews.
Councillor Hayden.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I think we had 2 papers, or it was brought at least twice to scrutiny last year, looking specifically at EHCPs. We will have the SEND inspection report as well, but I mean, we're more than happy to continue that this year, because this is a high priority for us. It's our top priority. So more than happy to come back to scrutiny to get your advice and guidance and high challenge, high support on this really crucial issue.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Rob.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just on the SEND Improvement Board, I think there's a requirement through that an update comes to the board on those services 3 times a year. So whether the draft work schedule, I'm just quickly checking what I've done, whether that reflects that. I think it just about does, but I can certainly sharpen that draft work programme up to reflect that.
Thanks very much indeed, Rob. And I think Rob's not aware of this yet, but I've met the independent chair. And it might be interesting, I think, at some stage to invite him to come to the meeting if that's possible. Okay. Scopes, happy's the wrong word, but yeah, okay. Councillor Goodall.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of questions about other parts of the report, but I'll ask a question about SEND for now. Thanks to everyone for their work in difficult circumstances. I know this isn't easy. I'm just on the bottom of page 103. There's a couple of paragraphs about recruitment. I'm just checking what this is referring to, because back at the beginning of the year, we had information saying that recruitment was underway and also about agency staff being recruited. Is this saying that didn't happen then and it's happening now? Or is this, did we kind of fail to recruit earlier in the year? Or is this new recruitment on top of what we recruited earlier in the year?
Rebecca?
Thank you, Chair. My understanding, and I'm sorry that it's not directly under my control, but my understanding is that there was a recruitment exercise undertaken in January. It didn't fulfil all of the posts, and on reflection, as they've revised the need and the demand, we've recognised that we need more. And I believe that the agency backfill, so filling those posts with agency staff as an interim, is a rolling programme of as and when we lose people and new people start, those agency patterns shift.
On the agency one, I know that there had been some difficulty recruiting agency. Is that still an issue? That are we kind of behind in terms of recruiting agency staff to fill the places?
I would have to confirm. My understanding is that it was about the contract with the agency for the educational psychology support and the plan writing process. But I can certainly get clarification and come back to you.
Councillor Hayden.
Yes, I would agree with that it was more, there was a delay to the contract with the agency, so it wasn't actually getting the staff itself, it was that the procurement exercise had to be done quite then, so it wasn't till early April that that it was all in place and those people were onboarded, if that's the phrase.
Councillor Goodall. Okay, thank you. Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to change tack slightly, just in terms of the attendance levels that are mentioned in the report. Just to pick out one thing specifically around special schools, where there's been a decrease in attendance levels this year. Do we know any specific rationale for that? And I'm just wondering whether, I know some schools used to pay for travel, for example, to special schools, etc., and obviously increasing costs have seen some places reduce that. Is that having an impact, or is there a wider issue we're aware of?
Chair, is it okay if I respond to that one? Thank you. I would say that each individual school reflects on their attendance and their settings at a kind of cohort level. I haven't seen any evidence that suggests that it is that pressure around transport. What we do know is that there is a rise across all children, so not just those with an EHCP or those attending special schools, around anxiety-based concerns and school avoidance due to emotional-based reasons, not necessarily ones that can always be overcome, but in a lot of cases through support we can seek to overcome them. We're continuing to work with our special schools around attendance levels, around making sure that the support that's in place is the right support to encourage and provide the support that the children need to be in school as often as possible. Quite often for our special schools, attendance and reduced attendance is more linked to illness and medical reasons for absence than it is in our other schools. So in our mainstream schools, it tends to be a more unauthorised absence or holidays and absence for different reasons. In our special schools, if we're looking at trends, that tends to be around medically approved absence, so for reasons that are unavoidable, linked to children's special needs when they're in special schools.
Councillor Stevenson? Okay, thanks very much, Rebecca. Any other questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, this has come up anecdotally, and we had a discussion about it at the school governors board that I'm on. Are there any signs with attendance that there seems to be an issue with transition from primary to secondary? And I know there's lots of support in that transition, but we've got incredibly supportive primary schools and the children in that kind of really supportive environment. And then even if the secondary is quite supportive, it can obviously still be quite brutal. I just wondered if there's any sign in terms of attendance that kind of start of attendance falling off is happening at the early times in secondary school. Just if that's an issue, do we need to look at that and try and do more on that transition issue?
Councillor Hayden.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, as you'll remember, Councillor Goodall, we actually have the attendance reports, which goes into all those. So I don't know off the top of my head, and Rebecca might have more knowledge. I mean, as a secondary school teacher, it is a very different environment, and transitions is something that we're supporting schools with. In terms of getting it right. And I know lots of schools, lots of high schools, secondary schools do a lot of work, both in the summer holidays, but also in the summer term. Schools near me have year sixes coming in and doing a year 7 timetable for a week or two in the kind of June, July, when their year 11s have left. So there's I know many run summer schools for those who are more vulnerable, and so there's lots of work goes on, but it is a huge change. It's a huge change for everyone, and as you say, they go from an environment where there's 30 children or less in a classroom with one teacher and a support assistant, for the day, and then they go to this some of the schools are huge and go to a very, very busy environment where there could be as many children in a year group as there are in a primary school, the whole primary school. So it is something, there is always, from my teaching day, so I do a drop-off in academic performance, etc., particularly in Year 8. But I would have to delve into whether that transition actually causes a drop-off in attendance. Anecdotally, Year 7 are normally the best attenders, you know, Year 7 and 8, yeah, normally the best attenders. They haven't got those hormones racing as yet. So, but I'll pass over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Anybody else want to comment on that? Rebecca?
Thank you. Again, it's so complex with the number of schools and number of children. So when you look at data at the full cohort level, as Councillor Hayden says, actually attendance in Year 7 and early Year 8 tends to be higher than attendance in older year groups. However, for those individual children where attendance starts to drop off in Year 7 and 8, it takes a lot longer and sometimes doesn't recover. So actually, we have a number of transition programmes from the primary schools, but also certainly over the last 2 years, we've done some targeted work in Year 7 for children that we think need that additional support through that transition to improve their attendance and or maintain their attendance that they had in primary school as they move into secondary. I think the reality, as Councillor Hayden says, is that we all know the difference between a primary school and a secondary school is stark. So it's about making sure the support that we put in place in those secondary schools, you know, we're not going to go back to a middle school model. We have primary schools and secondary schools, and we work with what we have and make sure that we're offering the right support for children and families. A lot of that is around the mental health support that's available too, and about building that resilience. And a lot of our primary schools are looking at that in a more targeted way now, recognising that impact of the really small supportive environment in primary school makes it a harder transition sometimes into secondary.
Thank you, Rebecca. Councillor Goodall? Okay. Maria?
Just a quick one on the recruitment. Have all the SENSAT posts been recruited into? And the running the two-tier system with the backlog, has that been communicated with parents and carers? Because what we're finding is somebody's recently submitted an EHCP and getting theirs within the 20 weeks, and then somebody's been waiting like 6. And I know there's no easy answer, but has some kind of communication gone out to people?
I'm going to come in first, if that's all right, Chair. And that's why we made the decision 2 years ago to do the oldest the first, because it does seem really unfair. So I wouldn't call it two-tier, I'd call it twin track, because they're going at the same time. But that's enormously frustrating for parents who have been waiting a long time. But I'm glad to hear that we are getting it right for, some parents, because we want to be also getting it right and showing an improvement. And that is exactly why the reason we gave. I apologise, I don't know whether it's in the plan, as you know, because you've been involved with the Send Improvement Plan. So it's in the plan to do this, but I don't know whether it's been specifically. So I will check that if Rebecca wants to come in, but we could do with going out again if it has been communicated and doing that communication again.
Rebecca, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. As far as I'm aware, we haven't issued a proactive statement to state that is what we're doing, but we are giving consistent messages to families when they come back to us to question, because understandably we have had families approaching the team to understand why somebody who's only recently submitted a request for an ECNA has had theirs, and somebody who's been waiting a long time hasn't. Just in terms of the SENSAP staff, no, they're not all yet recruited, they're not all yet in place, but we are working on it at pace.
Thank you, Rebecca. Maria, do you want to come back? Okay. Councillor Timmins.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I got a little bit lost in the agenda. Am I able to go on a different part of the performance report? It seemed like we were specifically talking about said. Right, so I'd like to change tact as well, if I may. So I'd like to ask about the number of young people not in education, employment and training. So I want to first note that it seems to be tracking in the right direction. However, from reading the report, the way that the not knowns are recorded seems to not be giving us a clear picture of where we are with that, something that I believe we need to address. I want to mention that it's great that we've received some extra investment, the 925 grand for the coordinated youth-led support, and 2.5 billion across the country, not just for us. Government, that'd be great. Government investment in the youth guarantee. However, as in many of the other KPIs, the area in which you live has an impact on your outcomes. So just looking at some of the data on NEETs, in the inner east, a young person is 3 times more likely not to be in education, employment and training than a young person in Horsforth. And then if I look close to home where I represent, my ward falls under the Pudsey cluster, and we border Bramley. And in just the space of a few short miles, again, young people in Bramley are 3 times more likely to be NEET than young people in my ward. So my question is, one, when will we start to see the impact of the extra investment actually making a visible difference? And 2, how do we ensure that we use this in a way that will ensure a more even playing field of opportunity for young people, regardless of the background or where they live?
Thanks, Councillor Timmins. It's an item that we'd already sort of marked up, and I would have mentioned it if you hadn't have done. It is rather, well, it's not strange. The fact that the number of people recorded as being NEETs has increased very marginally, but the number, obviously unknown, has gone up exponentially. And the percentages that are quoted, I actually queried with officers yesterday because it didn't make sense to me. It's also an item that we may well look at as an item for work in the current year, as part of work shared with the Adults and Health Scrutiny Board, and also inclusive growth. So with that, I'll move on to officers. Who'd like to comment on that one? Chris?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start just by talking about, from a recording point of view, about the not knowns. In the report, we touch on the way that a young person's employment status is recorded on the system, and when you have a status that we collect through schools, through colleges, and through telephone calls and the like, that has an expiry date on it, so it automatically becomes not known after a 6-month or a 12-month period. And part of the work that we do throughout the year is to try and stay on top of the chasing those young people to re-establish what that position is, so that the not known figure fluctuates throughout the year. We have a big spike at the start of the academic year when your previous year 13s age out of the cohort and year 11s come into the cohort, so there's a 50% change in the cohort each year. And there's a lot of work that goes on collating information with schools and colleges across the city. We have implemented a number of days of action to try and stay on top of that. And you'll see from the table in the appendix that when we submitted our figures for national information, our not known figure was relatively low, but it has increased up to the figure of March that we've quoted in the paper. That's because some of those expiry dates had triggered. So that does remain an area of focus, because you're right, some of those young people who are now recorded as not known will be NEET. Some will have an employment or an education status, but from the information we have, we can't hold on to their previous status until we've re-established what it is. So that is something that we work with partners to try and improve throughout the year. So hopefully that gives some explanation about the recording, and I think Rebecca might be able to talk about some of the other points that, excuse me, that you raised.
Thank you, Chris. Rebecca.
Thank you. So NEAT is one of those thorny issues that we recognise needs a different approach. So we've been working really closely with our city development colleagues around the impact of kind of recognising that the children that are not in education, employment and training become our young adults and adults of the future that are not in employment and not contributing in the way that we would like in terms of our economy. So we are focused on how we can pull together the different parts of, so there's the preventative work around improving attendance in mainstream school, improving outcomes for all children and young people as they're going through mainstream school, special schools, or alternative provision pre-16, so that they've got the opportunities that they need to get into appropriate post-16 pathways that excite them. When we're looking at the investment and the funding support, that's about us making sure that we've got the range of provision that children and young people as they reach 16 want to choose. So historically, the kind of defined pathways of A-levels are not necessarily what all young people now want. So we have to look at making sure we've got that breadth. We also need to focus on how recognising that there are children leaving year 11 without the qualifications that support them into level 3, level 4 at year 12. So we have to make sure that we've got appropriate technical and level 1, level 2 entry-level qualifications available at post-16 as well. So there's a whole range of approaches that we can take to try and support young people. The other piece of work, as Chris mentioned, in terms of the not knowns, those days of action, quite often what we're interested in understanding is the children that are not known, how many of them, once we do know, are actually in something, because some of them will be in employment, education and training. We've just not been able to track them. Others may not be ready for employment or education, so they may for some reason need some additional support. So we need to think about how we report and understand the depth of the needs of that cohort, so that it's not just a group of young people that we class as not known. There's more to it than that. There will be children, when we get to know them, that we still have to record them as not known, or we record them as NEAT, but they might be either waiting to take up an employment opportunity, waiting to take up a training opportunity. If we track somebody at this point in the year, for example, it might be that they can't start anything until September. So they would then still be tracked as not NEAT until the September, when they can take that training offer up. So it's about being able for us to be able to demonstrate more about our understanding of those young people than just the NEAT or not known or EAT, because those categories are so broad.
Councillor Timmins. Oh, Hayden, sorry.
I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who joins in the Day of Actions, because it is people from across the council and partners as well. They all come together because in a city of 800,000 people, it's a really complex system to navigate in terms of finding where our young people are if we don't know. Also, the way that our databases don't talk to each other, so the schools will have different databases and colleges, but they are. So I had the 14 to 19 partnership meeting last Friday, and they are looking at those systems and passporting data so that schools instantly can see what data we hold and therefore update or what the colleges hold and update accordingly. We are very dependent on schools and colleges telling us and recording accurate data. And then you've always got, what we have a particular problem at the moment is a bulge in the birth rate that happened about 15, 16, 17 years ago. So that's why we've been working really hard to get money into the city for new places. Those places need to be level 1 and level 2 courses, because we have more than A-level places than we need. That's not spread equally around the city, but from a sufficiency point of view. So it's really complex, and we brought it here before. The College of Building, Leeds City College in all its different guises, all partners around the city. We've managed to double the amount of independent training providers working in the city, which offer really valuable service and pathway to some of our most vulnerable young people whose standard college pathways are not appropriate. The problem we have in terms of creating places is that we desperately need bricklayers, and there's a waiting list for bricklaying places. They take up an awful lot of space because you can't cram 30 students and teach them like you can in an English classroom. To teach them, what you need is space. And I've been around the College of Building on North Street there, and it's fabulous. But, you know, that joinery workshop and the painting and decorating, they're huge rooms, and you'll have about 5 or 6 students like working in them. So there's also that confines. They have bought a new building, so which we enable the money came from government to us, and then went to, so exciting things are happening, but that at the moment, and I know that people are really working hard on this issue, but and we will continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Timmins.
Thank you for your detailed responses there. In terms of the recording, I did read all of that in the report, and it was good to see that when you did do your action days, I think 84 people, it mentions in the report, came off being not known. But that 6-month expiry for employment, is that something we can control, or is that nationally set? And then just in terms of the other bit, I think you addressed really well in terms of overall what we're doing to tackle needs. However, I was asking about a general focus in areas of deprivation, and I'd like to know specifically, you know, what kind of things we're doing in them areas, because that area has a greater problem with this.
So, thank you. Sorry, because it's real. So there's a number of different schemes, and with employment and skills in the, we work really closely with them, and obviously the areas of deprivation that are priority areas education and skills does come into that focus. So, but more recently, we've got the Youth Futures Hub in Bramley that Barker are leading on, which one of its focus is employment and skills and training. So that's an extra dimension that's coming to the city from the government, and that has. At the moment, it will grow because this is a test and learn year, but it has spokes in LS14 and LS10 as well. So they are one of their 3 main criteria is to look at youth employment. Then we've got all the different things that employers, we work with our anchor networks, employment and skills work with employers. So I was hearing about this on Friday. We work closely with DWP who go into schools and they have that offer. And they also have an offer where they work with families around employment and skills and support them. So there's an awful lot going on, but deprivation does have a huge impact on your educational outcomes and therefore on your educational employment outcomes and your future. So tackling poverty is the one thing we're committed to doing as well, and that's what we need to see. So I'm really pleased. seeing from September the rollout of free school meals for everybody on universal credit, so for all children there, breakfast clubs and the nursery places, the funded places there, which will enable parents to have more money to spend on other things, but also to work if their children are being looked after. So it's a very complex picture.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Rebecca, would you like to come in?
Thank you. Just in terms of the 6 months, I believe that it is mandatory, but I will just double check that it's not just our interpretation or our system that does that, but the requirements on the NEAT tracking duty are really specific about how often you need to recheck and reconfirm statuses, so I believe it's mandatory.
Thank you, Rebecca. Councillor Timmins? Okay, just back to the actual data itself. I know, I don't think the NEAT's acronym is a particularly nice one, but it's what we're stuck with. It's used nationally and all the rest of it, but it doesn't sort of sit well with me. It just seems to sort of compartmentalise children and young people into a category that may or may not be appropriate. Again, the data itself, I know you're reliant on a lot of other people to actually get it in, but the number of unknowns actually doesn't mean an awful lot, because I think, as Rebecca pointed out, some of the unknowns will obviously be encompassed in one of the other three categories. Is there any way in which we can make the data more accurate? I appreciate it's coming in from other partners and all the rest of it, but it loses value if it isn't as accurate as it could be. Lots of good things going on in terms of getting children and young people into work, employment or education or whatever, but it's the people that we don't know about perhaps that are the more important ones. Rebecca?
Thank you. I'm almost uncomfortable to say it, but actually we're in a much better place than we were a number of years ago in terms of our not knowns. So our overall combined NEAT and not known figure has been fairly steady for a long period of time. Historically, our not knowns were much higher and our NEAT figures were lower. So we've shifted that balance by getting to know more and understanding more about each cohort as they come through. The processes for sharing data with our schools, so for the when a child leaves year 11, that school is responsible for their tracking when they're first in sixth form in years 12 and 13. Our relationship with our schools and partners around that tracking has improved. I can't even think of a way of describing how much it's improved. It has improved a lot. It's much better than it was. But what that's led us to is knowing more about our needs, which is great and it's helpful because we can address that. As the cohort has then grown, the number of not knowns has also increased, and that's the part that we need to keep feeding back on, keep going back to our schools, working with our schools and with our independent training providers. So as more independent training providers come on online in the city, making sure that we've got a really good relationship with them to understand who is in those settings and when. We've also been working with the DFE around the mandatory data returns and how do we get access to some of those where providers return centrally to the DFE and don't have an obligation to return to the local authority. How can we engage with that data sharing to understand more? But that's all on data, and so actually what we know is we've got the people out there doing the work that they need to do to identify the young people and build those relationships and have those conversations and put the support in place. So we don't want to focus too heavily on how we improve the data, because again, the thing that we actually need to improve is the number of young people accessing employment, education and training, and that needs a person getting to know them and understanding what their needs are, understanding how they can be returned onto the track of employment, education or training, not us getting their numbers in, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Rebecca. Councillor Hayden.
There is data on you're absolutely right. They're not all not known. They are known to us, so they may have. So we have percentage of the actual number who are not in education, employment or training because of illness, ongoing conditions. They could be parents and therefore not working because they have... so we have all that data. It's presented at the 14 to 19 partnership. That will be... I mean, they're all not all known to us, but the majority are known in some way that as to why they're not, you know, not in education, employment or training. So yeah, there are some that as to why they're neat, and then the not knowns. It's more difficult, really, but they are known to us an awful lot, like as Rebecca was saying. So there is data available as to why they're not, and then there's also the ones that move out the city. So they're not known to us as to what they're doing, but we know that they're not in the city anymore. It's a really complex picture. I'm really not explaining it that well, but it's a really complex picture. But yeah, but it did. The not known came right down after that last day of action to below 600. So, and it's a really impressive meeting when you go to the 14 to 19. There's an enormous amount of very dedicated, hardworking people, completely committed to, you know, this agenda and improving the life chances of our young people.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Hayden. As I was listening to the last couple of speakers there, it reminded me of a very famous politician, American politician, who talked about the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. It lost me at hello. All right, thanks very much indeed. I think what we all agreed on, we would like more accurate data, but it's very difficult to put our finger on. Kate.
Thank you. Just obviously listening to what's been said and reading the information in the report, obviously I do think it's important to acknowledge that all the hard work that does go in to trying to address the issues. But there was something that occurred to me that I wanted to ask you about, and that was when I'm reading here about severe absences remaining high, and obviously you mentioned about children with sort of mental health difficulties and anxiety and not wanting to go to school. And I've also read that suspension rates have risen as well, and hearing what you're saying about EHCP delays still being an issue, I just wondered whether you were able to give an indication as to whether or not you've looked into the extent to which that delay with the EHCP's assessments and plans is actually contributing in any way to that severe absence, and perhaps also to suspensions if children have got difficulties within school that's perhaps where their needs are perhaps not being met. And also it occurred to me as well, with the severe absence, how have you looked at sort of how that's impacting on NEET? Because you said there's a lot more information that's needed, so is that difficulty around that level of severe absence then impacting on those NEET figures?
Rebecca, do you want to come in there?
Thank you. I think if we look at the data, there is a clear increase in the number of suspensions and severe absence over the same period of time that we've had the EHCP's delays. However, I don't think we haven't done an investigation to understand whether that's a causal link. So are they the same children? So again, at a cohort level, severe absence has increased. Suspensions have increased. Are they the same children that have been waiting for an EHC plan? We haven't done that work.
Because I feel that's my worry when I read it. I think, are some of our most vulnerable children who are waiting for EHCPs being in some way let down? I'm not saying, just as a byproduct of that delay. For me, that's really important because you've talked about the twin track in terms of the timescales, but so the child might have been waiting a very long time, and there might be a child that's not been waiting as long, but actually if that child is really, really struggling and it's impacting on their ability to be in school or for their needs to be met in school, and we need to address it, don't we? It's not just about the data, is it? It's about the children and families on the ground. So just I feel it's quite important to look at whether or not there's a causal link, and that's not to attribute blame, it's just to address it, to make sure that those perhaps most vulnerable children are being prioritised, if that's something that we're able to do within the parameters of how we work, or how you work, I should say.
I think Councillor Hayden wants to come in.
I'm not sure whether we can do that work because the data is, I mean, we could, but I'd rather get on with doing EHCP.
Yeah, no,
can
I
I just clarify though that in the vast majority of cases, children waiting for an EHCP are in school with their needs being met.
Okay.
So all children in Silks have an EHCP. So not having an EHCP shouldn't stop your needs being met and your education happening within school. What the complication and the difficulty it creates for schools is that they don't get the funding until the EHCP. But the EHCPs should be written in conjunction with school. Schools are the primary kind of, a parent has to apply for one, but they come from schools, the application. So schools are the ones that are already doing the work and meeting the needs. Where they have a difficulty is not having the funding to do the work that they're already doing. So it won't be the case in all cases, and there will be children who are waiting for a school to be named on their EHCPs, or schools refusing to take a child that parents want to go to that school. So I'm not saying it's for all children, but the majority of children waiting for an EHCP are having their needs met by very skilled and dedicated teachers in schools. What they need is to that be acknowledged formally, and then with a plan written up about what needs to happen, and then the money to come into the school to support that, and that's we are looking at mechanisms to support schools while they're waiting. So I just wanted to clarify that, because waiting for an EHCP doesn't mean you're not getting the support and the education that you need necessarily. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Rebecca?
Thank you. I think in the last 2 years we've had different approaches to prioritisation, and ultimately our current position is every child where a school or their family have requested statutory assessment of need are a priority. Like that's, so we can cut that data in lots of different ways. We can say those who aren't attending school, or those who are in the earlier years, or those who are at transition points, those who are looked after, those who are on child. There are so many different ways we could prioritise, and ultimately we've got to focus on all of them. Anybody who has a request in is a priority, and that's now the focus. So the work to do that causal link and that inquiry almost would be fruitless, in that our priority is everyone who's requesting for an ECNA has that needs assessment completed, so that we're not prioritising or selecting some children over others, because you can almost never get the full picture to understand which ones need prioritising.
So you're just doing it on time?
With the twin track, so not only the oldest ones, but the new as they come in as well.
Kate, could you make sure you use your mic when you're on, because you're not being recorded for posterity if you don't. I think we'll bring this one to almost to a close. I got one more question to come from myself on it. We're going to. Yeah, we're going to be looking at EHCPs in some considerable detail later in the year. So I think we'll just put this one to bed for the time being. I've just got one final question about early years performance, which I don't think has been covered by any of the questions so far. It did drop in the year in question, and it's considerably less than the national and other local partners in this neck of the woods, basically. Given the priority we're giving to prevention and early intervention, give us an idea why we're not actually achieving perhaps where we could be, you know, where we are achieving sort of higher up the scale. Rebecca.
Thank you. So, under our Best Start and Beyond work, we're looking at the why. The reality is that cohort after cohort, each year that we have the assessment on good levels of development, it's obviously a new cohort coming in and coming through. So the whys are different each year according to different areas. We can see patterns and trends though. So under our Best Start and Beyond strategic framework, we've got a work stream focusing specifically on reception year quality and good levels of development. So how can we improve GLD in that reception year by offering targeted support to families and children in terms of their learning needs. There's been quite a big piece of work over the past 12 months looking at the 2 to 2.5 year review with our health partners around making sure that we improve the take-up of the 2 to 2.5 year checks, but also that the outcomes of those checks are well shared and understood by everyone involved so that we can identify what those children's needs are and support children and families up until the point that they're in reception and receive that and undergo that good level of development check. The good level of development measure is a really wide-ranging measure and it's a teacher-led assessment, and quite often our schools don't always have a lot of time with those children to understand them and to undertake that assessment. So particularly families who where children don't take up their place in September, they might wait until the January or the Easter term to take up their school place, particularly when they're summer born. And therefore the teachers are making assessments on those children very early. What we know is as a city we've got a huge early years sector, so made up of our childminders, our private and voluntary sector nurseries, our school nurseries, our Little Owls nursery provision that's run by the council. We know that we've got really good and outstanding provision across the early years. So that issue that we have with our stubborn low GLD rate, which has been the case for a long time, is something that we've focused on, and every time we look at it we come up with a different potential reason why it's a concern. What we're looking to do now and focus on is addressing the low levels of GLD. So how can we identify needs early? How can we ensure that those 2 to 2.5 year checks are undertaken as robustly as possible across a wider range of children so that we understand early what those needs are? How do we respond to those needs? And how do we support families around the home learning environment and encouraging families across the city to understand the importance of reading with your child, doing fun activities, singing songs, rhyme time, those kinds of things? How do we make sure that that is understood across the city so that our children, as they enter reception, they are appearing at school more school ready, more prepared for what happens in school, so that as the teachers do that assessment of GLD at the end of reception year, they're more likely to meet that good level of development.
Just before I bring you in, Councillor Hayden, I know for a number of years our preschool attendance has suffered in comparison with other areas. I think Newcastle, for whatever reason, have always had a very, very good level of preschool sort of attendance and all the rest of it. Not an issue for today, but it's perhaps an issue the board could look at over the coming months or whatever, because if you don't get a good start in life, of course, it's going to carry on for the rest of your life. So, Councillor Hayden.
I just wanted to point out that these are the figures for 24-25. So the good level of development was taken in summer 24. So that's 2 years ago. So those children are now 6-7 years old. And we have to acknowledge for those children that they were born in a global pandemic and the effect, and I know our good level of development, but for those children they were born into and the early part of their lives were massively affected by, they didn't go out, they didn't socialise with, a great many people. only the really vulnerable or those parents in public sector jobs, etc., that could go to nursery and things like that. So we don't yet know the full effect of the pandemic, and I'm not blaming that, but I really think, especially with this cohort of children, my nephew's 6, he was born February 2020, so I didn't see him till October. So it might have been good for him, but it has got a massive effect on these children, as it has. And I mentioned this previously in Exec Board with the other results. I just want to say how amazing our GCSE results are. These are last year's year 11 were the children who didn't sit SATs at year 6, who didn't transition to high school properly with all the support that you normally get, and had a really, really strange start to their high school days in September 2020. So huge credit to those now 17-year-olds. They did a remarkable job last year, and all their teachers and families who supported them through what was a very, very strange time in our lives.
Back to early years, it wasn't meant as a criticism. It was a comment based on the statistics that we've been presented with today, and the cohort of children presumably that you're talking about are exactly the same cohort of children that are looked at nationally and also in other local authorities here, where we are not performing as well as those other authorities. Take all the points, all the praise that children are due and all the rest of it. I'm just wondering why the early years aren't as good as perhaps some of our neighbours or our national figures. No more than that. Okay. With that one, unless we've got any more questions or comments, I'll bring this item to a close. And if we could then have a natural break, 10 minutes, if you could be back by 5 past, I'd be very grateful. Thank you. Hi everybody, if you could come to order please. With a very quick apology, I was a few minutes late myself because I was accosted by the British Army in the on the way to the toilets. So just before we move on to item number 10, could just complete the recommendations for the last item, which is essentially that the board considers and comments on the information contained in the report and appendices, noting the assurances provided and considering whether any additional information or further scrutiny work would be of benefit. I think we covered that quite comprehensively. Could someone propose that we accept those recommendations? Yeah, please, yeah. Second? All in favour? Any against? That's it. Unanimous. Okay. Right, thanks very much indeed. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, which is the revised number 10, which is the overview of Coming Home to Leeds programme, who are children looked after. Ben, are you leading on this? Thank you. I'd like to kick it.
Thank you, Chair. So, good afternoon, colleagues. The paper you have in front of you gives you a brief overview of the Coming Home to Leeds programme. The Coming Home to Leeds programme was a programme initiated in August 2025 as part of the Directorate's approach to responding to the experiences of children and young people placed in external residential care. Important to note that external residential care is our most expensive form of care for children by cost per week per child, and important in the context that we had both in terms of outcomes for children and in terms of our financial pressures, that we took efforts to get a grip of our spend and costs there. The paper gives you an overview of the progress that's been made by the small team that's working on that, leading that work, and by the wider Directorate in supporting those outcomes for children. I'm pleased to be able to share with Scrutiny Board that we've seen a reduction from 164 to 120 children in external residential placements today, so that's a substantial reduction in overall numbers. The paper gives you some sense of the weekly savings that's achieved, so around net change of around £246,000 per year at the end of the last financial year. We're currently a bit more now than the number in the paper of £46,000 worth of net savings per week this year. Overall, last year the programme produced £3.3 million worth of savings to the council. This year so far, without the reduction of 4 that's happened this week in that figure, a figure of about 1.9 million this year. Obviously, in terms of accounting terms, a change that happens at the beginning of the financial year creates a greater saving in year of accounting. But critically, we know that those children would have remained in those placements for quite some time past the financial year in many cases. Some of those were children who were 13, 14, 15, some even younger than that. And so we know that once in those placements, they tended to remain there. I'm really pleased to say, notwithstanding the focus on cost and money, that the young people who've moved back to Leeds are thriving. They've come back to live with their family, they've come back to live in our care. Some of them have moved on to types of support and care that's more appropriate to them in terms of their age and their development. And the young people we've worked with have come back, as I say, to live with their families, and we've seen a number of real significant successes for those children. Several of them are living in our own children's homes, and the paper makes reference to the expansion in the children's home estate that we've undertaken over the last couple of years. A significant number of the children in our children's homes are living there now who had previously lived in external residential placements, so making a real contribution there. Your colleagues will be aware of the placement support team that's been established and the reunification team. You'll be aware of the multi-systemic therapy teams that we have in the city. They all contribute and play their part as part of a package of support that goes to families, that goes to homes, that goes to foster carers, that goes to different settings to support children in coming and living in the right placement for them in Leeds. So overall, the programme has been a success. We continue to be ambitious that more children will be engaged with the programme. I'm hoping that planning that we will continue to reduce the number of external residential placements that we buy in the market, and we'll continue to bring that down, and I'm optimistic that we'll get that below 100 by the end of the financial year. We want children to live in families, we want children to live in Leeds, we want children to go to their local school, be part of their local communities, and by and large living in a children's home, private children's home, means living outside the city. So we're ambitious that we make further progress for our children. And we're ambitious that we continue to produce good outcomes for them and give them good and best start in life and best opportunity to progress as adults. So I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Ben. Councillor Hayden, do you want to come in?
Just to say, I'm really proud of this work. It's the best thing for our children and young people. The outcomes are so much better for them, but it also means that we have much more of a grip on the financial challenge. But primarily, and always front of my mind, it's best for our children and young people. It's and Ben mentioned the reunification team, easy for me to say. We are one of only a few local authorities in the country that has a dedicated reunification team. So I'm really proud of that work. I'd like to thank them for all their hard work. It can take quite a long time to get that right. So the figures sometimes look quite small in terms, but you've got to get it right and you've got to do it slowly over time so that it doesn't, the placement isn't unstable later on, and an awful lot of support is put in. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Ben and the whole team. I know that Ben's told me that actually other local authorities are looking at the work we've done around reunification and having a dedicated team. So we continue to innovate, we continue to be a leader in the country on children looked after, because it's the right thing to do for our children. So I'd just like to thank them all for their commitment and collaboration, and we're seeing really positive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Just before I throw it open, just a couple of things. As you know, Ben, I've got a particular interest in this subject, and it's quite a remarkable turnaround, basically, on what it was 12 months ago. First, did most of this come out of the Newton work, basically, and you can explain that to some of the new members who are here. And the newer members, I think, will be taken aback by some of the figures that are quoted here. Ben was talking about around about £290,000 a week in net savings. Does that take account, Ben, of the cost of the care of the child once they move back to Leeds, essentially? And am I right in thinking that the first sort of tranche of children that are coming back were these with the less complex issues? And if so, is that likely to mean that the future reductions are going to be rather slower and perhaps may even come to a stop at some sort of stage?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the work we began this work on the final day of our ILACS inspection, actually in August last year. So I asked my service managers and corporate parents to come together to discuss this, because it was very clearly the challenge that we had for the rest of the year. So we began that work there. What Newton were able to do was to look at the work and in some senses provide confidence that actually it was the right approach, which was tremendously helpful. When you're dealing with an issue like this, when you're trying to make the right change for children at the same time as trying to sustain significant organisational change, you want as much assurance that actually what you're doing is the right thing, and having colleagues come in and review that who had experience of looking at this in other local authorities, who were able to look at what we were doing and benchmark that against other local authorities' practice, was hugely helpful. I think what Newton also did was gave us the confidence to go further and faster. So I think it gave us that confidence in the model that we had, again, based on their knowledge of others, based on the diagnostic work that they did. And that actually helped us start to increase our investment into the small team that's actually delivering the change. And it's the team particularly of 2 or 3 people working at the sort of hub of a range of interconnected different teams and services that have supported the delivery of this. You're right to say that we do need to, in this work, take account of the costs of the alternative. So young people don't simply stop needing support and care when they come out of an external children's home. The overall gross saving per week is around £320,000 for last year, around £56,000 for this financial year. And the figures I've quoted are the net saving. So we've in putting the data forward to you, we've talked about actually the net saving to the local authority. But just to be clear, the gross saving for last financial year was £322,000 per week. Not for every week. That's the cumulative figure we got to at the end of the year for all the children affected. Today, £56,000 is the gross saving. The net saving last year around £240,000 at the end per week at the end of the year. This year so far, although, as I say, time has moved on since this data was prepared, and in a good way, we're at £46,000 per week. So the figures quoted are net savings. just in terms of the range of need and complexity that children have, as you say, Chair, across our services we have children with quite significant differences in the type, need, depth, extent of their need, and it's really important that we get it right for each child, and what right looks like will be different for everybody. But what it's also true to say is that the children who've moved through this programme and have moved on to live in our homes, gone to live with their families, gone to live in supported accommodation, moved into different types of provision, probably reflect a range of need. So they probably reflect the full spectrum of need, from those with the least need and the most resilience and stability to those with significantly more need and significantly less positive factors. So I don't think that would lead me to think that we will start to see a reduction in how effective we can be. I think the challenge with this work is that sometimes young people need to move fairly quickly, and other young people need a much longer piece of work leading up and getting prepared for them to do that. And so what we've been doing, certainly over the last 3 or 4 months, is starting to think much more consistently about who are the children who move this month, next month, the month after, but also who are the children who we need to prepare for, because there'll be events in their lives where it makes sense for them to move. And an obvious example would be children completing their secondary education. It isn't in any way sensible to move a child in June who's in the final month of their secondary education. So there are a number of children who will get to August, and we will then need to start to think about, okay, what would the next step for them be, and where would we look to move? So the change and the development that will be in children's lives is something that will create some natural points where it makes sense for them to move, and for us to support their move in that way. So I think there are grounds to be optimistic that we can continue to move young people through this programme and into a better setting for them. We also have learned through this that an important part of what we need to do is to anticipate where need is and what the market can provide and what the market can't provide, and where we need to step in. And so what we've done very successfully in Leeds is we've stepped in and have stood up, have acquired 14 two-bed children's homes. We've got nearly all of them operational now. We're seeing huge benefits for the children in that care, hugely improved outcomes for those children, stability, progress development, all really positive for them, and critically delivering at a significantly lower unit cost per week. So a really important shift. We understand that we're going to need to continue to adapt our offer. And you'll see some of that with the Kirkstall development. Again, a hugely effective programme for young adults, so not for children but for young adults. That's created space in our service and our offer to enable people who are a little bit younger to move into the provision that those people would have been in otherwise. So we start to have a better gradation of care and a better gradation of offer, and that will help us manage young people and make sure that we've got the right fit for as many people as possible.
Thanks very much, Ben. Just before we come in, Councillor Hayden, you covered actually one of the issues that I would like more information on, and that's the sort of the comparison of the quality of care that the children were getting outside of Leeds compared to the quality inside. You've commented on that, and it seemed to be very positive from what you've actually said. You also gave us a breakdown in the report you gave us of where the children are likely to go now. Not today, but at some future date, I think we'd like a little bit more information on where those children have actually ended up. I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but the big advantage of all this, of course, is that it's made a huge, or will make a huge reduction in the overspend that children and family have been suffering from for, well, as long as I can remember, basically. It's nice to sort of see it, but it's much more important that the children we're looking after get the care that they're actually entitled to. So it is, and we'll talk about it again in a moment, on sources for work, because it may well be one of the items we put forward for an inquiry this year, children looked after externally. But Councillor Wilson wanted to come in. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, just a great report, great news story in this. You mentioned that your aim is to try and hit under 100s this financial year, which would be amazing. What's your main? Is that based on your anticipated number of extra properties becoming available? And related to that, what barriers are there for you to scale this up? Is it about property numbers? Is it about availability of staff or what. And this is just an aside really, but I was speaking to an officer earlier today about the council house growth programme, and they were talking about how we do deals with developers to basically buy houses from developers as they build them, and that leads to a reduction in cost for us in terms of acquiring properties. Are you able to look at that sort of thing? Are you able to join with the council house growth programme to get do you see where I'm getting at? To add weight to that, maybe get a good deal on acquiring a house, maybe buying a house on spec that doesn't need so much in the way of adaptation, and which then also becomes an asset for the council in future years, perhaps even becomes a council house in future years, if it's no longer needed for children in care.
Thank you. So just to take that in sequence, in terms of our projections for where we think we can get to, as long as we're able to deliver the same change and moves for children that we've delivered over the last 6 to 8 months, and to maintain that consistent approach, we will get to our objective by the end of March. So in terms of am I confident? Yes, reasonably confident. One of the challenges in dealing with small numbers is you can have an event, or you can have a series of events that you can't see coming, and you have to respond, and that is part of public sector work. We are ultimately the provider of last resort in some ways, and we have to handle situations. One of the things that's been really important is that our colleagues who support families and children in their communities and within their families have done a huge job in helping us by continuing to support children to stay in their families. So actually the demand for new care placements has reduced, which means that when we've been able to move children out, we've not immediately had to fill that space that we've created. So that's been an important part of this. So this has always been, and our work all the way through over the last 2 or 3 years, has always been about both reducing demand as well as better managing the offer that we have. And that's a really important part of this. Important to say too that throughout this, our residential homes, which is a component of this work, have maintained the same judgment from Ofsted. And all but one of our homes is rated outstanding or good, which is a substantial achievement, and another one confirmed very recently. Our occupancy rates remain extremely high, so almost all of the children's homes we operate are full. We are not doing this by having large vacancy rates within our children's homes, and that's a really important point to mention, because that reflects the really significant work that staff in the residential service do. In terms of the acquisition of new properties and their use, really important for us to think about what the child's experiences of being in care. And one of the things we're really keen to do is to make that as normal as normal and average, if you like, as possible. And so part of our programme of acquisition of properties has been just to buy normal homes, homes off the market, and we've as I say, bought that suite of properties that we're expanding into, and we've tended to go for properties where the communities are relatively settled and established. So buying new build properties does present some challenges in this, because you're coming into a community that's forming, and it's less straightforward about how you understand your fit in that, because essentially a lot of the people who will be your neighbours you can't really understand yet, and the like. So there's probably some challenge in that. We have started to work with our colleagues in housing around acquisition of properties, because we do have scenarios where it makes financial sense for us to acquire a property as opposed to pay for the extension of an existing one, or to underpin with rent. And the acquisition of that property can sometimes allow a family to resume care of their children, and that means that we're not providing that care. So that's massively better for those children, huge improvement for them. But from our point of view, purchasing a property, often an ex-council property sometimes, can assist in that family reunifying, and actually financially from our point of view makes a huge amount of sense. So we certainly are keeping an eye to acquisition of property. We also have as an authority a significant estate of properties, and as other parts of the authority come to the conclusion that they no longer need a property, we are in the conversation of having a look at those and thinking, are those ones that would make sense? Because of course if we already own it, we don't need to buy it. So we keep our options open with that. But I've got a colleague in particular who's led this work all the way through the last 3 years, and has played a huge role in the delivery of the small group living homes programme and a number of other programmes and new builds. And with our colleagues in LBS, with our colleagues in assets, we've managed to get to this piece in terms of the acquisition of the properties.
Councillor Wilson, can I come in? No. Councillor Hayden, sorry, I really should have brought you in before, and I forgot to bring you in. Sorry.
That's absolutely fine. Yeah, and on the thing of, and Ben just mentioned it there, of when this work started, looking at those high figures of external residential and having that laser focus, yes, started last July. But it's been a 3-year programme, hasn't it? Because it's only been enabled by us having our own houses, homes, our own capacity to deliver those outcomes and deliver the best possible care for young people coming back. So this has been, yeah, a 3-year piece of work. As Ben said, Councillor Wilson, we could keep buying and we will keep buying, but actually what we need to do, more importantly, is at that end of early prevention and stopping children ending up in crisis and remaining with their family as much as possible. And there is a lot of work going on with housing to assist each other, because one of the big barriers to reunification is not having suitable number of bedrooms, etc. So yeah, it's best all round if we can sort that out between directorates. I just want to make one final point, is that we will always have some young children and young people in external residential because it's the safest, best thing for them. There are some children who are not safe to live in Leeds. It's not safe for them to live in Leeds. That's really sad and tragic, but it's a truth that we have to acknowledge. So yes, we're going to get it down below 100, and but there will always be some children who it's the safest, best thing for them not to live in Leeds.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. My only cautionary word there is to beware of setting targets. Okay. Councillor Wilson, do you want to come back, or are you happy with that?
No, except to say I think he did caveat the target quite nicely. So let's remember that section of what he said as well. No, I'm happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Timmins.
Thank you, Chair. It's such an important area of work for the council, probably one of their most important. So great work in this area. Thank you for all your hard work. Delighted to see an improvement, but one that's focusing on the well-being of the children. And in terms of the work that we've done on the reduction of use of private children's homes, we've stated some figures, and my maths is that works out around about £50 million a year. You know, and I know it's not about money itself, but actually, what else could we use that money for in improving outcomes for, you know, other vulnerable children across the city? So I suppose my question is on that, when would we likely see the impact of that within our budget? And my next bit is just a comment, really. I do see when children's homes are coming up in areas, people, members of council, stigmatising children's homes to people who live in them communities. And my ask to them members, if they hear me say this, is be a bit more responsible in your words, because every child deserves a home, some stability. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Timmins. Ben?
Thank you. So just to respond to your last point first, if that's okay, I think it's really important, just on that point, to acknowledge that we have been consistently supported by councillors and at ward level when we've come to councillors and said, do you know what, we found a property in your area we'd like to buy, and we're in the process of doing that, and we'd like to let you know that we want to open a children's home there. And I know that's not always the easiest thing for councillors to hear, and because I know that you will have questions from constituents about that. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that we have been consistently supported in that respect by councillors at an individual level, and that has made the job of my team, my job, much easier. In return, and as a consequence, it's enabled us to mobilise a programme which has produced significant outcomes improvements for children, and has produced significant improvements overall in our budget. And we move to a position where, as a local authority, we've got significant heft in this area, and that gives us depth to handle things that otherwise we would really struggle with, and other local authorities do struggle with. So because we've got scale, because we've got expertise, because we've got a range of opportunities and options for our children, because we've been able to invest and build the size, actually our ability to respond to the needs of children becomes stronger and stronger, and our need to make emergency or very short notice procurement into the private sector, which is really when it starts to be bad for children, because it's short term and it's not planned and it's not thought through, but it's also extremely expensive, is lessened, and that's a really important part of this. Just in terms of your point about the budget, the budget for children and families contains a significant component which is about how we looks after children, and it is not just children in residential placements. We spend a significant amount of money, over £100 million a year, on how we do that. So an important part of this is how we move that investment from children in who are looked after to supporting families to support their children. And so part of what we're doing through the Family First initiative, part of the work through Best Start and Beyond, part of the work that we're doing within our directorate is supporting and investing in preventative services where we can, so that we can move that spend to support families rather than using that spend to support quite expensive placements for children where outcomes aren't always good. So that work is starting to feed through into budget. This year's budget and allocation of resources in the directorate is different to last year and reflects a planned reduction in demand. We are on target with that planned reduction in demand at the moment. We get our P2 monitoring fairly soon, so we'll know precisely where we are. But I'm confident that we will continue to sustain that trajectory, and that will release resources that can then be used to invest preventatively in supporting families to look after their children and supporting communities to care for their children.
Thank you, Ben. Councillor Timmins, okay. Right. Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Ben, and it is fantastic work, and I think one of the highlights of my time as a councillor was when we visited some of the homes together, including in your ward, Councillor Chesterfield, and it really was very inspiring. So I welcome this work. I also welcome what you said about the coordination with housing, because I know I've come across cases where there are families that are really struggling, families that might like to go through that reunification process, but they simply don't have capacity, and there's a lack of suitable housing. So I think it's really welcome to hear about that, and particularly if there are ways of unblocking any delays. I wanted to ask you, though, when we look at the programme overall, there are obviously many success stories. Where there are cases where things don't go so well, what are some of the reasons for that? Obviously, I want to talk about the positives, but also where things don't work, what are some of the reasons for that?
Thank you. I think one of the things that's really striking about this piece of work and reviewing the individual experiences of children and families has been the number of times that it's gone really well, and the very infrequent occasions when it's not. It's probably quite tricky to talk about that to talk about those people where the placement move hasn't worked out for them, where the new arrangements to support them and look up hasn't worked, because in a sense there's not a lot of them, and it's hard therefore to aggregate together and say there's a shared reason and why that wouldn't happen, and also in a public forum difficult to get into some of the specifics. I think where it works best is where we have time to plan and time to work on it. Where it works best is where we have the right, where often we're providing the support and the care as part of a package of work that we do. I think that we always have the ability then to fine-tune anything to much more quickly to respond to something if it starts to feel a bit uncomfortable and we think we could do a bit better there. So I think so I can probably talk more about where it works best, and from there I guess you can infer some of the areas where it doesn't. But I think, as I say, the striking thing about this is for the number of children where, when I look through the list, where actually they have stayed where they went the first time. There is, I think, a need for us nonetheless to be circumspect, to be cautious about that, and to be reflective and to evaluate where it doesn't. And we have had a couple of scenarios where it's not been as effective as I'd like and we'd like, and that part of the consequence of that has been a period of thinking with the team about, okay, well, what did we need to do differently there? And I think more time to plan, more time to think, more time to move is often a part of that. I think sometimes too, making sure that we've got everything aligned before we go is a critical thing. What I mean by that is the support for a child is multifaceted and delivered by a number of partners as well as us. Sometimes the pressure of a placement saying this placement needs to end means that we need to move a bit quicker than we would otherwise choose to do so, and we haven't necessarily got those things aligned, although we do our best with it. So it's not something that I can talk in sort of great detail about, but I do think that the planning, the working with family, the support that we provide and the work that we do, and the degree to which we have in reach if it's not our own provision, or the degree to which it's our own provision, are probably hallmarks of it being successful.
Thanks, Ben. Do you want to come back in? Yeah.
Yeah, of course I realise that you can't go into specifics, but what I understand from that is that in the majority of cases it does work well. It does work to plan, and that's a fantastic tribute to you and all of the team, and I certainly appreciate that. Leading on from that, I know we've talked before about some of the formal and also informal support. So obviously the formal support that your team provides. Is there more that can be done around maybe some more informal mentoring? I know this is something that we've discussed before, and thinking particularly of people who were maybe foster carers in the past, or have experience in this area, but they're no longer doing that now. And I can think of a number of people I know in my ward and who are retired foster carers, but they've got a lot of relevant experience which they could share, whether it's and particularly for families, and also maybe young people who themselves are care experienced as well. Is there more that we can be doing in terms of some of that informal mentoring provision?
Thank you. I'd certainly say if there are any foster carers who've retired and fancy coming back, we'd be very keen to hear from them. So just to put that out there, I think that there is, and I think we currently run an independent visitor scheme for young people. That scheme's been really effective for a number of years, but it could be bigger and could go further. So I am interested in how we develop the opportunities for young people to build relationships with adults outside of a form. I come and talk to you because it's my job. Because I think that's a really important part for young people, that they often feel that adults only show them an interest because they're paid to be there and it's their job to do that. And whilst that's not the case, because my colleagues could choose to do other things and they choose to do this and they choose to work with children and young people, I understand how that can be a feeling, and I understand how that's not a helpful feeling. So one of the things I am very interested in is how we could develop our skill and our offer to young people to have relationships with adults from different stages in life, because that's what my son does, it's what our children do. They have relationships as part of our world, and I think we need to work much harder at thinking about how do we go about creating a normal experience for children, how do we work at doing average, and I think relationships with other adults is a really important thing to do. It's also, of course, part of the social care reforms that the Minister State is very keen on, of having long-term relationships that support young people through their care journey, through being care leavers and into being young adults. And we will all have had relationships with adults outside of our home that went from being a child through to being a teenager through to being a young adult, and those are sources of support. So it's important that we think about how we can replicate that, and we are looking at some programmes of work internally to do that.
Okay, thank you. Maria.
Yeah, hi. Just going back to the children that are still outside of the area. what work is going on with them, with the children and the families, so the families know that work is going on to either bring them back into Leeds or bring them closer to wherever the school provision might be. And if the provision isn't quite what you would want it to be, as good as the ones that you can bring home, what extra support is being put into the external children's homes?
Thank you. So it very much depends on the individual circumstances of the child and the relationship they have with the family and why they might be in care in the first place. So there are children who we look after because it's simply not appropriate for their parents and family to have a role with them, through to children where, despite parents and carers being very loving and wanting the best for their children, it's not working out and they're struggling to support those children. And so that question, it very much depends. Where we would want to be is as much as possible having an open conversation and open dialogue with those parents, or those grandparents, or that uncle, or those people who have shown a consistent interest in the child's life and who we believe could be part of the child's future and we want to work with. But certainly my expectation and our message to our staff is that we need to continue to work with families to the fullest extent that it's appropriate to do so. And for some families that will be relatively modest contact. For others, it's about being a very active partner and a very active participant in how we support those young people. In terms of preparing and thinking about young people coming back, the extent to which we would do that very much depends on the relationship we have with that parent or carer or person who's important to the child, and very much, but they are key people. And just coming back to the point about children's feeling that we only show an interest because we work with them. Those are people who don't show an interest because they work with them. They show an interest because of an emotional link and a commitment to that child. And it's really important for that child that we make the most of that. In terms of planning for where we get to, there's always an element with what we're trying to do that we're trying to get the best that we can, but it's not always the perfect fit. So what we will try sometimes have to do is make a call about this, where we can find somewhere for a child, maybe slightly further than we'd like it to be, or it may be slightly further from school, or it may be slightly in a different place, or not quite right. But what we have to do is make a call about the balance of what's in that child's interest. And again, that should be a joint discussion with family. That should be a discussion with the child and young person, because as they get older, they're going to become more and more a voice that we absolutely have to listen to in terms of what we do and what we offer them and where they want to be, to the extent that they're, whilst also making sure that they're safe and looked after as well. So even with a relatively old child, there's still an element to which we have to be a parent and say, well, that's not okay because that's not keeping you safe. But the older they get, the more they're going to be a partner in that conversation as well as parents. So the where they might move to is a balance of what makes best sense in terms of that child, where they are developmentally, what they want to do, what their parents want to do, and what we think. In terms of if where they are isn't quite meeting expectations, it very much would depend on what the issue were. We place children in our policies to place children in children's homes, if thinking about children's homes particularly, where Ofsted's assessment of them is that they are either good or outstanding. So nearly all the children we look after in private children's homes are in children's homes that are rated good or outstanding. Occasionally a rating may change whilst the child's have been placed there, and then there's a conversation about, is it right to disrupt that child's experience and those relationships the child has because Ofsted have come to a conclusion about home, and sometimes it is. And sometimes we'll look at that conclusion, we'll look at what the home is saying they're going to respond to, we'll look at the strength of relationship, and we'll say on balance it makes sense for the child to be there. But that's an individual discussion, and it's also a decision that's taken at a relatively senior level within children's services. In fact, I might well get involved in that sort of conversation. So it's something we take quite seriously in terms of how we look after that young person and that child. In terms of the sort of formal support to a home, it would very much depend on what the issues were, but we have staff within the corporate parenting part of the social care directorate whose role is to support care arrangements. So that can be quite pragmatic support, supporting a child to go places, do things, to be active, and that might be something we'd offer more to a foster carer or a kinship carer. But it can also be support from extremely well trained and very experienced clinical psychologists, and that sometimes is support more often to a residential setting where you're dealing with quite difficult behaviour and where the child's outcomes don't feel secure and assured. So it very much depends on what the issues are. We would also have a quality assurance process that we have around all our procurement work and all our homes, and we rely on Ofsted to talk to us about what's happening. and all children's homes have a visit under what's called Regulation 44 of the Children's Home Regulations, which is an independent person who comes in every month and will spend around a day in a home and check things out, and we rely on those reports. And of course social workers visit, parents visit, children talked about us, what it's like there. So we would try to find information from a number of different sources and make sure that if we are seeing an issue, that the home or the manager or the responsible individual for the home is responding in a timely, appropriate way. Problems do happen, things will happen. Once it's happened, we have to take a view about, is the response appropriate, proportionate, was it timely, did it have enough pace, enough grip? And if those things are the case, and the child is there and it makes sense for the child to continue to remain and they're still safeguarded, then we're going to work with a home there. If we don't feel a home is taking an issue seriously, is responding with pace, with grip, then we'll start to have a conversation about, is this home where we want our child? Is it good enough? And if it's not, we'll have a conversation with the child, with the family, with the people involved about that child potentially moving, because ultimately all of it is conditional on the child has to be safe and looked after.
Just one comment. It's difficult to move a child then, because you just said all the children's homes are basically full. So if there is issues with certain children's homes, how would you get that child to be safe?
Very much depend on the circumstances, depend on the age of the child. Children at different ages, there are different regulatory requirements that we need to meet. We would seek to find either another provider. We would seek to find an arrangement where the child was supported by our staff. We would seek to find an arrangement where the child maybe came into one of our homes, and we are pretty much full. We've got 1 or 2 vacancies. So the question would then be whether or not it made sense for that child to come into that home. There is always a very real challenge in an immediate move, and it is very hard to make that work for the child and for the children who are already living there, because it's their home and suddenly somebody turns up that they don't know anything about, and that's not nice for them. So we have to be very, very cautious about what we do. What we may do is go on holiday with the child. We may have a break with the child. We may think of other things that a child would normally do as part of childhood that would provide some space and opportunities to provide time to think about how we can support that child and that family. We may start to have a renewed conversation with the family, with mum and dad, but also grandparents, uncles, aunts, and talk to them about the challenges we've got. And sometimes people will say, well, look, maybe we could do something for a week or two, or for a month or two to help find that, or maybe we find that there's an opportunity for some longer term work there. So it very much depends on the circumstances of the child and the resources that are there for that child. But it's often a very challenging scenario when we need to think quickly to move, and it's something that we work hard on when we get. What is helping us with that is that the overall scale of the service now is offering us more resilience. So our ability to cope with that and to have a positive offer for a child when that happens is much greater, and it's not an analogue. It doesn't increase the number of homes, it doesn't increase proportionate to your capacity, it increases exponentially in relation to your capacity.
Okay, Maria? Yeah, okay. Councillor Goodall.
Thank you. Congratulations, great work. You touched on why you thought it was useful to have Newton Consulting involved. Just a gentle challenge on that. It sounds like the idea came very much from the working group. Did you really need to go to Newton Consulting, and is it possible just to have more confidence in what you're doing and know that you're doing the right thing and save money by not using consultants?
I think it's always a question when you bring somebody in. It's always a question when you spend money, am I getting value for it? So whatever it is we do as managers and senior leaders in the council, we have to say, is the investment worth it, and is it worth doing? I think what you are often trying to deal with as a manager and a leader is the degree of confidence you have in an approach, and the extent to which actually, if this is what we're going to pin our hopes on, is that reasonable to do, and how do we come to that conclusion? We started the work as a group because it seemed like the sensible thing to do. So we started to work on actually asking ourselves, who could move? How could we help that happen? How could we manage it? What Newton did was they gave us confidence that model was the right approach to take. So that was not just they popped in one afternoon and said, yeah, it looks great, carry on, lads. It was a detailed piece of work that included an analysis of the children we were thinking about, that included work with our staff, with our carers with different parts of the market to say, actually, is this viable and sensible? But what it triggered it critically was it gave us sufficient confidence to say, actually, yes, it's worth investing additional resource in. And what that additional resource has done is been allowed us to maintain the grip and the pace. So I think we would have got there, but I don't think we would have got there as quickly. And what's critical here is that actually that work gave us the confidence in the model, was able to benchmark what we were doing against what other local authorities had done, was able to base it on work within the directorate that I didn't have the ability to do because I didn't have the time to do. And so it gave us the confidence to actually say, okay, we'll put an additional investment into this. And it's that investment that's been responsible for the pace of the change and the pace of the delivery. So in terms of the cost and in terms of where we are, you could argue some of the high saving we've created could be said to have used to pay for that. It's not quite as straightforward as that, but there's a very clear relationship between that support and the pace at which we've gone and the saving we've achieved. So I think on balance it was worth it, but I think the question you always have to ask when you're spending money is it a good investment and do I get more back than I put in? And I think we did here.
Councillor Goodall? Actually, it's a point well made because it was something I was going to bring up at the end. I think in any large organisation, I'm being very careful with my choice of words here, it is quite difficult to change direction at times, particularly when you've been moving in a direction for a fair amount of time. So from a purely personal point of view, but I think it reflects the feelings of most of the people here, I welcome whether you call it a change of direction or a change of policy, whatever it was, it's working. And it looks like it's going to continue to work. So from my perspective, I'm very happy with the way things have gone. Could we have done it earlier? Probably. Like everything else, we are where we are. Things seem to be moving on as far as I'm concerned, and really that's it. Has anybody else got any other comments or questions on this particular item? Councillor Senior.
I just want to say I've been a foster carer for 15 years and I think the work you're doing is amazing. I think it's great for kids, so thank you.
And on that note,
thank you for your support as a foster carer too.
Thank you. And we couldn't do it without our foster carers because going back to a point that was made earlier, the Leeds Foster Carers Association are making links with our residential homes to see if there's any work they can do with, just making them feel like they are part of Leeds and they're part of the foster carer family as well. So, but also they might be able to go from living in residential home to a foster carer, because often that is less of a jump to going home. But I just want to say a huge thank you to, well, not just the team, but we couldn't do this without a whole council and a whole city approach. To be honest, it has to be a real partnership approach. So to make these, because they are big shifts in, and I want to thank the vast majority of my colleagues around the city that were really supportive of any time that Ben and the team went to go and say we're buying a house. I know it can be difficult when a private provider goes and buys and they don't have to tell us and they don't have to, but we are really, really concerned with being good neighbours, about being part of the community, because that's what's best for our children as well, but it also makes life so much better. So huge thank you to the vast majority of our communities, but nearly all our my colleagues around the chamber and around the city who were really supportive of this. And it just feeds into that we are all corporate parents. You don't have to be a children's champion, one of the 8 children's champions, to come to our corporate parenting board meetings. I know that there's faces around this room that do come, and thank you for that. But I'd love to see as many, I mean, do tell us you're coming, because, we want to get enough seats round, we don't want people not being able to fit in the room, but that would be a nice problem to have, wouldn't it? But in those corporate parenting board meetings, We discuss, we have housing colleagues there, health colleagues, education, all across police, all across the city really, coming together to look after our children. But what we hear from at the end is one of our children's homes. So you actually hear about, you do get that detail about the work that they're doing. We had a very funny one where they made a fantastic video, didn't they? It was hilarious. So if you are interested in finding out what the great work that's going on, please do come to get in touch, and we'll send you the meeting details, and you can join online, so you'll be very, very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. On that note, I think we'll close this one down. Bearing in mind you made a very good start, let's see how it progresses over the next 12 months, 2 years or whatever. Okay, moving on to the recommendations. That the conclusions of the paper are noted and that the ongoing work of the programme is supported. I think that's come across pretty well in this meeting, I think. Could someone propose that recommendation, please? Happy, Rob. Yeah. Seconded? Councillor Senior. All in favour? Against? Okay. Fine, right. Thanks very much indeed. Moving on to the penultimate item, which is sources of work. You'll have seen that we've got the programme, or provisional programme I should say, for the rest of the year in the papers. Rob and I and other members of the board at various times have discussed what we could or possibly cover during the course of the next 12 months. I'll just very briefly run through some of the items that have been suggested so far. It doesn't mean they will be included, it's just that these are items that have been suggested, and I think one or two members of the board will want to sort of comment on them as well. So I'll run through them very quickly. One is about leadership generally of children and families for fairly obvious reasons, because of the big change we've had recently, and frontline staff. The SEND improvement and the inspection report, obviously we'll wait for that to come out, but I can't imagine that we wouldn't be discussing it at some stage, because it is one of the items we have almost as a standing one. Post-16 SEND transport, which is the next report, taking into account the next semester or whatever. We've discussed whether or not we could have an inquiry, which is a separate sort of issue to a full scrutiny board. We would have members of the scrutiny board probably meeting privately and then reporting back in due course. Two items, one on SEND and one on children looked after, notably the work we've just been discussing. I think we've decided that SEND might be probably a bit too much given the amount of attention it's had over the last 6 months, and the attention it's going to get over the next 6 months or so. But again, it's entirely up to you whether or not we do include this. The DSG management plan, looking at the current overspend, which is likely to increase over the next 3 or 4 years till the end of the period when the government have decided to cover it all, when finally we've got to find the 10% left of whatever figure that actually is. Unregistered children's homes. It's been in the news recently, but it's also been brought up by one or two members of the committee here, and also given the subject we've just been talking about, it's very germane, and possibly preschool. You know, what we can do to actually improve attendance at preschool. So they're just 8 or 9 items that I've sort of come up with, together with suggestions that have come from other people. I know, Councillor Stokes, you'd like to speak on one of these things anyway, okay?
Thanks, Chair. So firstly, thank you for bringing me in, and also for the papers that have come today. I think they've been really useful discussions. The items that I wanted to bring in particular, I've got 4 of them. The first one is around leadership capacity, and for me it's at all levels. So I know a number of social workers, and I think there's certainly a level of leadership capacity questions for me at all levels through the department, and it feels to me like that maybe we can put that into the July item on management structure. So hopefully there's capacity for that. The second one I wanted to talk about was children's homes, and we've had a great paper today about the progress we're making as a council, and my concern is also around questions have been raised with me around unregistered care homes, and I think so. I've had a number of assurances around the checks we do as a council in terms of making sure it's not just any unregistered child care home, but I feel like having that discussion in a public meeting would be really powerful, just to be really super clear about what we're doing to make sure children are safe. And I noticed, Chair, that we've got a safeguarding item in October, so I don't know if that would fit there. I know we've talked about, my third item, I know we've talked about not in education, employment or training, and I share your feeling. It's not the nicest term, but it is a national term, and so I'll use it here. And I think there's something that hopefully we can look at, whether it's a three-way scrutiny board or whether one board takes the lead on this. And I think it also links to care leavers. So I know we are really proud of the council recognising care leaving as a protected characteristic, and I think that's a really important step that we took. And one of the things that one of the subcommittees was going to look at is how we guarantee a job offer to look after children. Lots of people who are in business or own a business would give their young people a chance in their organisation. And we as corporate parents of Leeds City Council, it's a massive organisation, and so I feel like there needs to be some kind of really solid offer for care leavers to have an opportunity to work for the council. And I'm not saying that if it doesn't work, it's got to work out, but I feel like we've got a moral responsibility to give people a chance. So I think there's something around how does the NEAT piece fit with our responsibility, and how many of those NEAT children are care leavers, and I think there's a piece around that. And the fourth one I was going to raise, which is the EHCPs, and obviously we've already had a really strong conversation about that, and I think it's going to come back anyway, so I won't go into that item again, but those are the topics I wanted to raise. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scopes. Anybody else got any comments, whatever?
Thank you, and it may well link in with some of the suggestions that Councillor Scopes has made. I think it'd be quite helpful to look at the child poverty strategy. I know it's something that we've discussed before, but I think it's one of those items, particularly with national developments, where it's very much where things are very much moving at pace. I think it would be good to look at that at some point. I don't think it necessarily needs to be a whole inquiry in itself, but I do think it's quite helpful to see where we are and to have a discussion about that, and for us to be able to ask questions.
Thanks very much indeed. Any other comments?
Yeah, agree. Something around the not in education, employment or training. We did talk last year about FE, and I know we've got that extra funding, but there's still an issue, as you said earlier, with the number coming through. So I wondered whether we need a discussion with that, because obviously if there's not enough FE places, that's going to have a knock-on effect on not in employment, education and training. So I don't know whether it's worth trying to fit in a discussion about that at some stage. I'm a little concerned about post-16 SEND transport waiting till October, given I don't know whether the new members have had this, but the emails that have gone back and forth about some of the delays in the applications for post-16 SEND transport. Can we fit a brief discussion in about that in July, just to make sure that the process for the next year is that we know what's happening and that we can scrutinise that? The other thing, this might come under safeguarding. I've had a lot of concern. I've had concerns myself, but I've had concerns from other people about the whole thing around the kind of young boys getting involved in the kind of manosphere conversation. The whole, obviously adolescence, the programme brought that out a lot, but there have been some concerning incidents related to that. It might, as I say, come under the safeguarding conversation, but if that could be part of the safeguarding conversation, that'd be useful just to look at what is the council doing, to try to prevent that.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Anybody else? Okay, just as a matter of interest, on the post-16, there is an issue around timing, I think, here, Rob, isn't there, and when the data will actually be available.
Yes, I know what you said was slightly different to that, Councillor Goodall, but yeah, the the round for the applications for the coming year won't have completed that, and because I have had the odd discussion with colleagues on this, so that would be the only thing to note on the July request.
July request was about post-16 SEND transport, whereas FE, I was saying, FE can be later.
Okay,
yeah, FE would be whenever we get the figures, basically.
Transport. Sorry, I meant transport as well when I was commenting there. Yes. Sorry, post-16 S&D transport, yes, the round for applications won't have fully completed by then. So there's a risk that we go through a similar discussion, albeit I recognise what you said about policy implementation. But
we may have a little more information about, you know, the first quarter that they looked at, but we won't have any information about the following year. It's not an escape clause. It is genuinely about, you know, having the data available, because we then have to have another meeting later in the year to discuss the latest sort of applications or queries. Okay, but we can certainly look at it anyway. And regarding safeguarding, I think 2 or 3 members have actually mentioned it. That's the number one issue that we should be looking at as a scrutiny board, I think. So no issues on that one. But looking at the number of items that have been brought up, I wonder if you'll move to 2 scrutiny board meetings a month instead of 1. What will Rob will collate all these. They'll be mentioned in the minutes, but it's very important you come back to us as soon as you possibly can, because although this is the first scrutiny board meeting of the year, all of a sudden it's almost towards the end of the year, and it doesn't look like we're having one in November. Possible date there, you know, depending on what we're up to, but that's a huge amount of work there. We also discussed last year we'd like to be more proactive in the work that we do rather than reactive on the policies that have already been made and all the rest of it. Some of these issues are in there and stuff, but it's really getting a balance right. And given you know, the makeup of the scrutiny boards this year, and the, you know, the change in loss of overall control and so on and so forth, there's an awful lot more work gone on the scrutiny staff. So we've got to take all of that into account. But if we can fit all of these in, we most certainly will. But please come back to Rob and to me as soon as you possibly can about any of the items. We know who's interested in them, obviously. But it's a decision for the entire board, and it's important that everybody gives us their opinion on what we should have and what we shouldn't have. Okay? All right. Councillor Hayden.
Thank you. I'll be really quick. What Councillor Scopes was saying about the care leavers offer, actually, yeah, we're doing that. It comes under the subgroup, the employment work stream. So that might be something that we could get Councillor Flint involved. I'm not sure which scrutiny her directorate is scrutinised by, but I'm sure she'd be happy to come along for an item on that if we could put it in, or maybe when we're discussing the care leavers more generally. But yeah, that work's going on, and there, if you're a care experience, you are guaranteed an interview if you fit the criteria in the council. But there's a lot more to it than that. You mentioned misogyny or misogyny and the manosphere. So I can send you the invitation, but we've got a what do we call it, a conference sort of thing, but a very practical one for tackling misogyny in schools on the 2nd of July here at the Civic Hall. We've got lots of different groups from that come in to talk to schools about what they can offer, and helping schools in a very practical way, because I was a teacher. I know you don't want to just listen to people. You want to go away and say, right, we can do this in our school, because the new guidelines are coming in September. So all schools need to be, but it's a wider societal problem. But that's one thing that we're doing that I can send you the invitation for if you're interested.
We're not into the inquiry yet, Councillor Hayden. Rob, you want to come in there?
Yeah, just briefly, Councillor Hayden, on the point you raised there about the care leavers thing. There is a bit of a remit issue in terms of which board. It could equally come here, or the newer board, the Economy and Inclusive Growth one, I think it's called. So that's a bit of a background discussion with my colleagues as well, and chairs.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Rob. Right, if we've no other items on this agenda item, we'll move on to the recommendations. There's a possible change to the recommendation, which I'll cover in a moment. Members are requested to reflect on the information and guidance provided within this report when considering potential areas for scrutiny for the forthcoming municipal year. There's also the possibility that the next Scrutiny Board day may or may not change. Pete Thorpe's availability is a problem next month. We were due to meet on the 8th, and he's asked us to move it. We discussed it at the pre-meeting, and Rob is going to go back to Pete and discuss this. So the meeting on the 8th may or may not change, and that's I can't say that any more strongly than I can. Rob's going to go back and discuss the reasons for it and all the rest of it, because of course if we do change the date, at least 2 members of the Scrutiny Board will have to change some other arrangements which they were bound to attend. So it's quite a difficult one. So I won't include that in the recommendation at this stage, but can I have, if you can remember what the recommendation was, can someone propose it? And second? That's Ross. All in favour? Any against? Unanimous again. Okay, thank you all very much indeed. The last item would normally be the date of the next meeting, which at the moment is scheduled for the 8th of July, but we'll come back to you hopefully within a day or two on that one, yeah? Right, and just finally, I'd just like to thank, they've all gone now, but the people from the Councillor Hayden herself, of course, Ben, Rebecca and Chris, and anybody else who's contributed to the papers we've got here at the board today. Thank you all very much for turning up, and I do hope that for those of you it's the first meeting, it made some sense. It's very complex. It's a very complex business, and it gets even more complex as the year goes on. So once again, thank you all very much indeed, and of course he's now gone, but Rob in particular, because without him none of this would actually happen. So look to seeing you all next time.